rise up against us. We were overthrown. For centuries, hidden away in darkness. Tortured by thirst. Choking down dust. Starving. Until now, our hunt begins again.
They had reported back regularly. Dear God Emperor. I scrolled to the next item, from Thracian Primaris. A private residence in Hive 62 had been firebombed just before midnight. 8 dead, unidentified. The location was listed as 62 Up Hive, level 114871, which was the address of the subsidiary office I maintained on the capital world of the Helican subsector. Barnd Ferrical, who had been with me for 30 years, ran that place with a staff of 7. The next, Hesperus, 2 men killed in a firefight with Juve gangs, just before midnight a week ago. They had wandered into the wrong part of town, an RBT spokesman said. Luther Witt and Gan Blake, 2 of the most capable undercover agents I ran, had been operating on Hesperus for a year, seeking to uncover a Zechian cult that was preying on the Juve population of the Underhives. Next, Sarum, capital world of the Antimar sub. One of my most promising pupils, interrogator Devra Shibor, had gone there under my instruction 8 months prior to infiltrate and expose a chaotophiliac ring in the Central University. She had posed as Dr. Zeza Baj, a historian from Punzel. The news item recorded the death, apparently by suicide, of the promising academic Baj. Her body, dead for about 8 hours, had been discovered in her bathroom at Choirbel this same morning. And then the last, the most shocking. From the Sameter Global Newswire, posted a week ago. The residential home of Inquisitor Nathan Inchabel had been attacked by an unidentified enemy and obliterated. Inchabel was listed amongst the dead. I sat back. They were all looking at me. Amos was leaning his chin on his hands, and the 2 women were staring with anxious patience. They're all dead, I said. Everyone. Every thread of my staff operation. My home here, the distaff headquarters, and all the agents I had on active work in the field. Everyone. Everything. All hit at effectively the same hour on the same day of the week. My voice tailed off. I was too deeply shocked. Crezia poured me a glass of Amasec and took one herself. All of it. Gone. The operation I had spent decades building up. The friends and allies I had drawn together. All my visible resources had been identified, targeted, and eliminated. Apart from Dear Fishig slogging his way back to meet us, we were all that was left. I felt disconnected more than anything else. The network of intelligence and active personnel I had built up since the start of my career had been brutally taken from me. I was alone. I wanted nothing more than to see this Kanyar the Sharp face to face and make a reckoning. I went to bed, the Amasec untouched, and slept fitfully. In the small hours, I woke painfully from a dream I couldn't quite remember at first. As I lay in the darkness, the details slowly returned to me. I had been dreaming about the escape from Spaten. Medea and Yekud Vance had been calling out to me, begging to be rescued. I remembered the sensation of taking Medea's hand and clutching out at Vance, who couldn't quite reach me. The Janissaries shot him down, cutting his body apart with lasfire. His psychic death scream had cut into my mind like a hot wire. And that's what had woken me. Hadn't it? I woke again at 4. The night was quiet, except for the click of the mountain crickets. Something was wrong. I got up, slid the auto pistol out from under the mattress, and crept out into the landing. I could hear Amos snoring in his room and the distant sighs of Cresia in slumber. Alina's door was open. I looked in. The bed was empty and the quilt cast off onto the floor. I edged down the corridor with my back to the wall and my weapon raised in both hands, almost as if I was praying. There was a light shafting out from under the next door. The bathroom. I heard water gurgle and light suddenly flooded me as the door opened. I aimed the gun. "Oh God! Golden Throne, sir! What the hell are you doing?" I slapped my hand across Alina's startled mouth and pulled her into the shadows. "You scared the hell out of me," she whispered once I relaxed my grip. "Sorry." "I was just going to the bathroom." "Sorry. Something's wrong." "Gregor, what's that noise?" Cresia's voice floated down the landing. "Get back in your room," I hissed. In a typically Cresia Burshildi manner, she did the opposite. She was pulling on her silk robe as she padded down to join us. "What is damn well going on?" "For once, just shut up, Cresia," I snapped. "Well, excuse me all to hell." I pushed them both behind me and crept down towards the door of the box room. "Nice rump," said Cresia. I was only wearing a wrap. "Will you be serious just for a minute?" I snarled back. "Please, Doctor," urged Alina. "This is serious." The box room door was shut and dark. "See," said Cresia. "No problem." I felt the doorknob and realized it was loose. Cresia jumped as I kicked the door in and aimed my gun at the bed. The empty bed. Alina turned on the light. The wispy, fraying strands of Tal's bindings were still tied to the bedstead. He'd bitten through them, or tugged them off. "Golden Throne, he's gone!" "Oh, no," Cresia murmured. "I only loosened his bonds a little." "You did what?" I told you I was worried about the constriction, the lividity in his hands and his..." "You didn't tell me you'd slackened them off," I raged. "I thought you'd understood what I meant." I ran downstairs. The unlit hall was pale with moonlight that slanted in through the half-open front doors. "He can't have gone far. What does it matter anyway?" Cresia called after me. I stepped out into the street. There was no sign of anyone or anything. The cool shadows of the night spread fluidly across the flagstones. Tal, I was sure, was long gone. I went back inside and Cresia turned on the hall lights and screamed. Fabes was bent over in the corner, like a man who has fallen asleep sitting up. But he was very dead. His throat had been slashed. A wide pool of blood was leaking outward slowly from his hunched form. "Do you see now, Cresia? Do you?" I yelled up at her. Tal was loose. He knew who I was and where I was. We had to leave. Fast. Chapter 12. Into the night. Into the mountains. The Trans-Atenate Express. A prompt from the dead. "No," said Cresia. "No. No way. No. This isn't up for debate, Cresia. It's not a suggestion. It's an instruction." "How dare you order me around like one of your staff lackeys, Eisenhorn? I am not leaving." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The brutal murder of her man Fabes was causing her great distress. Getting through to her would be hard. I turned to Amos and Alina. "Get dressed. Collect up everything and stow it in the flyer. I want to be away from here in under half an hour." They both hurried away. So I reckon Tal only had an hour's head start. 90 minutes worst case. Given his Vesserine pragmatism, I figured he had headed straight for a Vox station to report our location to his brethren. That's what I'd have done in his position. He could have tried to kill me himself, but by then he knew not to underestimate my ability. There was a decent chance I'd have taken him down, in which case the secret of my location would never have got out. No, he'd gone to find means of sending the message. It was impossible to know how close elements of his party were, but if we were still here in 60 minutes' time, I didn't much rate our chances. It also occurred to me that once he'd got his message off safely, he'd be clear to come back and have a try at me himself. I took Cresia by the hand and led her back upstairs. Her eyes were puffy and red, and she was a little vacant with shock. She sat on the end of my bed as I got dressed. "If I could just go, Cresia, I would," I said softly, finding a fresh shirt. "If it was just a matter of walking away and removing all my crap from your life, that's what I'd do." But that's not what's going to happen. Mercenaries will be heading this way. They will be arriving soon, probably before dawn. They will question and kill anyone they find. You won't be able to tell them you don't know where I've gone. They will... Well, they're Vesserine Janissaries and they're being paid well. I can't leave you here. I don't want to go. This is my home, Gregor. My damn home. And look what you've done. I'm sorry. Look what you've damn well done to my life. I'm sorry. I'll make amends. She got up, the anger coming back and eclipsing her sorrow. How? How the hell can you make up for this? How the hell can you make up for all the pain you've ever caused me? I have no idea, but I will. And you have to stay alive so I can. I've got the ruination of your nice, comfortable existence on my conscience, Crezia. I will not add your death to that. Fine words. I'm not coming. I'm going back to bed. I grabbed her by the arm and stopped her. I had to find a different tack. As a medic, she was almost professionally selfless. Appealing to her sense of self-preservation was futile. I need you to come. That's the truth of it. I've got to take Medea with me. I can't leave her here, and I don't think she's in a position to travel. Of course she isn't. So she'll die? If you move her now? In her state? Better she traveled with a doctor then, don't you think? She shook off my hand. I will not allow you to jeopardize the health of my patient, Eisenhorn, she warned. Then consider the prognosis, Doctor. If she stays here, she'll be dead by morning. They will kill her when they find her. If she comes with me, without you, she'll likely die too. I think what's really in question here is your Medicae oath to preserve life. I hated being so manipulative. Well, with her, anyway. She regarded me with venom, knowing that I'd cornered her. Bastard. Clever bastard. I don't know why I ever loved you. I don't know why either. But I know why I loved you. You always cared. You always did the right thing. She turned and walked out of my room. I finished dressing and tucked spare clothes and Barbarisata into a leather grip I found on top of the wardrobe. Then I picked up the rune staff and stopped in the doorway. The Malus Codicium was still in the drawer of the nightstand. I wrapped it in a pillowcase and tucked it into the grip. How could I have nearly forgotten it? The first answer that occurred to me was strange and unnerving. Perhaps it wanted to be forgotten. The flyer's interior lights illuminated a patch of the little courtyard. Amos and Alina had stowed everything, clothes for each of them, and the manuscripts and books they had rescued from Spaten House. I put my own stuff aboard and ran a pre-flight. The flyer was charged to optimum. "Help me, damn you all," Crezia said. She was dressed in a dark green utility suit and a quilted coat, and had 2 travel bags with her. Medea lay on a grav gurney, strapped in place in a resuscitrex unit, and an arthesium full of supplies magnetically anchored to the underside of the gurney. Crezia had slaved 2 med skulls to our patient, and they hovered in the air behind the stretcher. We got Medea aboard and then clambered in ourselves. Crezia sat beside Medea, saying nothing. She didn't even look back at the house as we rose into the night and powered away. We flew south, towards the main Atenate Range, a massif of gigantic peaks that split the center of the continent for 3,500 kilometers. The Itaval and its neighbors were just foothills compared to this great geological structure. I didn't want to stay in the air for too long. Tal knew we had a flyer and would have informed his comrades. This was just a short hop to get us going. I studied a chart slate and began to compose a route. By dawn, we were about 90 kilometers to the southwest and several hundred meters higher, in the base valleys of the ragged-edged Sembo. It was a soaring black shape in the early light, with a glinting wig of ice. Its mighty neighbors lurked behind it. We sat down at a town called Tyroyer, a small place that thrived as a logging center and a way station for travelers heading to the resorts at the top of the Asembo Pass. I parked the flyer on the edge of the town under a break of firs, from aerial observers. No one had said much. The air was briskly cold, and I turned the cabin heater to maximum for Medea's benefit. "We should eat," Alina said. "I'd go and get something, but..." None of us had any money. Crezia pulled off her gloves and produced a wallet from her coat. "Am I the only person who thinks practically?" she commented sourly. Alina took a credit bar from Crezia and walked down through the trees into the town. She came back 15 minutes later carrying a styrene box in which were 4 tall sweet cafetes in disposable flasks, hot pastries in waxed paper wraps, a loaf stick and some vacuum-sealed sausage meats. She'd also bought a mini data slate loaded with a touring guide of the region. "I thought it might be useful," she said. "Great," said Crezia. "Now we can pick the best spots to ski." While Alina had been gone, I had spent considerable time and effort freeing the flyer's side hatch. It had been bolted open in military style for the permanent gunner position. With the weapons stowed and a fragile human cargo, I wanted the cabin sealed. It would pull to, but the latch wouldn't engage. I tried brute force, but I don't think it had ever been closed in its entire service life. We ate and drank in silence, and the med skulls administered sustenance for Medea via the fluid drips. I watched the sky and the long arc of the road into the town. There wasn't much traffic. A few utility vehicles and mobile drones, the occasional fast speeder. All tourists heading for the resorts. While I ate, I scrolled through the guide Alina had bought. We left Hyraeir at 9:30 and spent the rest of the day flying further west, around the shoulders of the Asembo, over the mirrors of the high lakes and on towards the northern resort of Grudge. For a long time I was convinced we were being followed by a small, yellow speeder. I became so concerned that I diverted east, around a tract of mountain pasture and steep forest. I lost sight of the yellow craft, but about 30 minutes later picked up a black one that shadowed us steadily at a distance of 5 kilometers. My anxieties returned again. In the late afternoon, as we flew in towards Grudge, the black flyer turned south on a route that would take it to the spa resort of Firiol on the southern face of Mons Fulco. I had been jumping at phantoms. At Grudge, I landed the speeder in the cover of some pines southwest of the old city wall. I took Crezia's credit bar and walked into the town alone. Grudge was an old town with a meandering plan like Ravello, but it was far less picturesque. Slot bars and dance parlours occupied the main thoroughfares, and there was a busy stream of young, vacationing Gudrunites on every street. I found the local chambers of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, a tall, black-windowed structure on the corner of the main square, and went inside. A careworn female adept called Nisint debited my credit bar and provided me with access to the Aegis account. I wanted to check if anything had come in during the last day or so. I was in for a surprise. There was a communique with Harlan Nail. He had survived. His message was quite long and written in Glossier. The gist of it was that he had left Messina 2 weeks earlier, suspecting, for reasons that he didn't go into, that something bad was afoot. That didn't surprise me. Nail had a nose for trouble. That he, of all my poor lost agents, had been forewarned of the danger was easy to believe. He was, at the time of sending, just 3 days shy of Gudrun. I had the adept send a reply, also in Glossier, telling Nail to head for the southern capital, New Gibe, and, once there, to arrange passage off-planet. I asked him to confirm and told him I would send again when I was close. 4 days was my estimate. 4 days, and we would be with Nail at New Gibe and heading off-world. The snow track was essentially a luxury recreational vehicle. A well-upholstered cockpit and adjoining cabin, housed in a sleek grey hull and carried on a main track power unit with thick forward wheels for steering. The rental agent was in full flow, singing the machine's praises when I cut him off. "I'll take it." "A sound choice, sir." 2 weeks rental. I'm driving to Ontry. I'll be leaving it there. "That's fine, sir. Deliver it to our offices in Ontry. There's a little paperwork to fill out. You have means of identity?" Crezia's credit bar soaked up the cost of the deposit. I wanted to keep the transaction fairly anonymous. I used the rental agent's palm reader to rouse another of my slumbering fake identities. Torin Gregori, a vacationing Thracian businessman with ample funds. The dealer seemed satisfied. The snow track was a hefty brute with a surprising kick in its heels. I drove it back out of the town towards the flyer, stopping on the way to stock up from a grocery market. My friends at the flyer regarded my approach with caution. I discovered later that Alina had had her las pistol drawn and ready. I leaned out of the cab and waved at them. "Get yourselves aboard. We're switching vehicles." We left the empty speeder under the trees and as soon as Medea was safely positioned in the plush, leather-padded cabin, I headed out towards the pass road. I didn't tell the others about Nail. I didn't want to get their hopes up. By nightfall, we were powering up the snow-dusted highway over the pass towards Entree. Grudge fell away behind us. I thought I saw a small yellow flower approaching the town on the left, but it was too far away to be sure. We drove through the night, taking turns at the wheel. The weather was clear, and the cockpit box was tuned to the climate casts to catch snow advisories. Crawling up the northern hem of Mons Fulco, we ran through steady squalls of snow and had to drop speed and use the main lamps. Crezia was driving at that point. She'd lived in the mountains for long enough to know what to do. I napped in the cabin, resting out on the long bench seat opposite the still sleeping Medea. I dreamed about her again, dreamed about saving her. Yekut Vance was in my dream too, desperate for my help. He screamed, bawling out a spear of sound and sigh pain that woke me. I blinked over at Medea, but she was still stable. Elena was asleep nearby. The cabin rocked and vibrated with road noise, and snow ghosts fluttered past the windows. "Are you all right, Gregor?" Amos asked. He was sitting on the bench seat at the back of the cabin, surrounded by data slates. "A dream, that's all, Uber. It woke me last night, too." I paused and sat up. The previous night I had assumed I had been woken by the sounds of Tal's escape, but now it had happened again. The dream had woken me both times. Yekut Vance's terrible death scream of pain and rage and frustration. We rumbled into Entree in mid-afternoon the following day. Heavy snow had slowed us down, and ice caked the copper roofs of the famous resort. But heavy snow had also brought the winter sports crowd into town in great numbers. The place was buzzing with activity, the roads sluggish with vehicles, the skies flecked with arriving speeders. I drove the snow track into the parking lot of the Entree Transcontinental Station and found a place. Amos and I went up to the concourse building where Torin Gregori purchased tickets for 3 connecting sleep berths. The express was due in an hour, we were told. Just as the mighty Atenate Range creases the center of Gudrun's largest continent, so the Trans-Atenate Express runs like an artery along it. The railway is famously romantic. Most who ride it do so because of the ride, vacationers who would rather travel than ride. The young flock to centers like Grudge and Entree to use them as a base for skiing and ice surfing, but the wealthy choose the Trans-Atenate, where they can sit in coddled luxury and watch Gudrun's most spectacular scenery slip by outside the window. The great chrome Promethium-fueled locomotive pulled into Entree at 5, pulling a string of 10 double-decked carriages. Porters helped us to maneuver Medea aboard. Our cabins on the top deck of Car 3, a wagon lee, were first class and spacious. We put Medea in one of them, with Alina to one side of her and Crezia to the other. Uber and I shared a fourth. There were communicating doors between the suites, and everything was finished in polished maple. The express hooted its siren and panted out of Entree, muscularly taking the gradient into the Fonette Pass. The huge silvery beast could reach 170 kilometers an hour on flat sections. I regarded the timetable: overnight to Fonette, then a short stretch to Locastra, followed by a high-speed, uninterrupted run all the way down through the Atenate Majors, across the southern plateau to the coast. We would be in New Give in just under 3 days. There was barely any sense of motion, a slight rolling vibration that one swiftly became oblivious to. The cars were robust, thick-skinned, heated and insulated against the Atenate chill, but the side effect of this was to virtually eliminate exterior sound. The massive engine, deafening from the vantage of the platform concourse at Entree, was virtually inaudible. Only when the express hammered down a cutting or a gorge and the engine noise was compressed and channeled backwards by the steep sides did we catch a whisper of it at all. With the cabin blind down, I might have been at home in a comfortable parlour. While daylight remained, I kept the blind up and was afforded panoramic views of the pass, the snowfields, pink and soft in the sunset, the hard-shadowed scarps of rising ice broken at the folds by knuckles of black rock. Once in a while, beige smoke from the engine streamed past the windows and obscured the view. On slow turns, it was possible to lean across to the window port itself and see the foreshortened flanks of the cars and train ahead, segmented like a great snake, the chrome and blue and white livery catching the last of the sun. Twice, a long jumping shadow of the train ran alongside us across the snows. Night fell, and the views outside vanished. I drew the blind. Amos was snoozing, so I thought I might walk the length of the train and get to know the layout. The communicating door opened, and Cresia came in. She was dressed in a grey satin robe with tightly laced pleating that ran from the high throat right down to the top of the gathered skirt. A fur wrap was draped over one arm, and she had put her hair up. I rose from my seat almost automatically. "Well?" she inquired. "You look stunning." "I meant well, as in, isn't it time you escorted me to dinner?" "Dinner? Main meal of the day? Usually found somewhere between lunch and the nightcap?" "I am familiar with the concept." "Good. Shall we?" "We are fleeing for our lives. Do you think this is the time?" "I can think of no better time. We are fleeing for our lives, Gregor, on the most exclusive and opulent mode of travel Gudrun has to offer. I suggest we flee for our lives in style." I went into the bathroom and changed into the most presentable clothes I had with me. Then I linked arms with her, and we strolled back along the companionway to the dining van, 3 cars back. "Did you bring these clothes with you?" I asked quietly as we wandered down the softly lit, carpeted hallway, encountering other well-dressed passengers walking to and from the dining van. "Of course. We left in haste. And you packed a gown like that?" "I thought I should be ready for anything." The dining salon was on the upper deck of the 6th car. Crystal chandeliers hung from the arched roof, and the roof itself was made of armor glass. It doubled as an observation lounge, though just then it simply provided a ceiling of starry blackness. A string quartet was playing unobtrusively at one end, and the place was filling up. The air was filled with gentle music, clinking silverware, and low voices. Discreet poison snoopers hovered like fireflies over each place setting. A uniformed steward showed us to a table by the portside windows. We studied the menus. I realized how hungry I was. "How many times, do you suppose?" she asked. "How many times what?" "Years ago, when we were together, you had come to visit me in Ravello, secretive as is your manner. How many times did I suggest we took the express through the mountains?" "You mentioned it, yes." "We never did, though." "No, we didn't." "I regret that." "So do I. It seems so sad we're doing it now out of necessity. Although, I might have guessed I'd only get you on a romantic trip like this if you had to do it. Whatever the reason, we're here now. I should have put a gun to your head years ago." We ordered potage velour, followed by sirloin of lowland runker, roulade with a macedone of herbs, and forest mushrooms à friole, and a Chateau Zandier from Sameter that I remembered was a favorite of hers. The soup, served with mouth-watering chapon and a swirl of smetane in wide-lipped white dishes, delicately embossed with the crest of the Transcontinental Company livery, was velvety and damn near perfect. The runker, simply pan-seared in amasec, was saignant and irreproachable. The Zandier, astringent and then musty in its finish, made her smile with fond memories. We talked. We had decades to fill in. She told me about her work and her life, the interest in xenoanatomy she had developed, the monographs she had composed, a new procedure for muscle grafting she had pioneered. She had taken up the spinet as a means of relaxation, and had now mastered all but 2 of Gazella's studies. She had written a book, a treatise on the comparative analysis of skeletal dimorphism in early human biotypes. I almost sent you a copy, but I was afraid how that might be misconstrued. I own a first edition, I confessed. How loyal. But have you read it? Twice. Your deconstruction of Turkson's work on the Dimamar A sites is convincing and quite damning. I might take issue with your chapters on Talano-Pithecine, but then you and I always did argue over the out-of-terra hypothesis. Ah, yes, you always were a heretic in that regard. I felt I had so much less to give back. There was so much about my life in the last few years I couldn't or shouldn't tell her. So I told her about Nail instead. This man is trustworthy. Completely. And you're sure it's him? Yes, he's using Glossier. The beauty of that code is that it's individually idiomatic. It can't be broken, used, or understood by outsiders. You'd have to be in my employ for a long time to grasp the fundamentals of its mechanism. That bodyguard, the one who betrayed your household. Kronsky? Yes. He was in your employ. Not for long. Even with the basics he'd grasped, he couldn't dupe me for long using Glossier. So, we're going to be rescued? I'm confident we'll be able to get off-planet. Well, Gregor, I think that good news calls for an indulgent dessert. The steward brought us ribot de nappe, sticky and sweet, followed by rich black hesperine caffeine and digestives, an oaky amasec for me, and a thimble of pasha for her. We were laughing together by then. It was a fine dinner and a good night spent in delightful company. I have not known its like to this day. I was woken by the jar and the thump of a halt just after dawn. Outside, a whistle blew, muffled by the car's hull, and there came the distant mutter of men's voices. Slowly, I slid out of bed, doing my best not to disturb Crezia. She was still deeply asleep, though she rolled over and reached, murmuring, into the cooling space I had just vacated. I tried to find some clothes. They were strewn on the floor, and with the blind down, it was a matter of touch. I prized back the edge of the blind with one finger and peeked out. It was already light, frosty and colourless. There was a station outside, and people milling on the snowy platform. We had reached Fonette. I got dressed, shivering. Now the train was halted and idling. The wall vents issued a cooler wash of air. I opened the door and slipped out, casting one last look behind me. In her sleep, Crezia had curled up into a ball, cocooning herself in the bedsheets, shutting out the cold and the world. Outside it was near freezing and very bright. The wide platform was busy with passengers leaving or joining the express, and servitor units conveying pyramids of baggage. Snow was lightly falling. I hugged myself and stamped my feet. Several other travellers had got down from the train to stretch their legs. Fonette station occupied an elevated area above the town, shadowed to the north by Mons Fulco, and to the south by the Utes, Minor and Major, and then the weather-veiled bulk of the central Athens. "How long do we stop?" I asked a passing porter. 20 minutes, sir," he replied. "Just long enough for changeover and for the tender to take on water." Not long enough to run down into the town, I figured. I stayed on the platform until the boarding whistle sounded, and then stood in the carriage hallway, leaning out of the doorway window as we slowly pulled out of town. The station building slid by, revealing a view of the town below that had not been visible from the platform. Steep roofs iced with snow, a ministorum chapel, a sturdy Arbites blockhouse, a landing field just below the station causeway, filled with berthed and refueling flyers. One of them was small and yellow. I went back to Crezia's cabin, took off my coat and boots, and lay beside her until she woke. She rolled over and kissed my mouth. "What are you doing?" she asked, sleepily. "Checking the timetable." "I don't think there are any changes on this line." "No," I agreed. "We'll be at Locastra in about 4 hours. There's a longer halt there, 45 minutes. Then the long run to New Give." She sat up, rubbing her eyes. Drowsy, unguarded, she was more beautiful than ever. "So what?" she asked. "I'll check the astropathic account there. There'll be time." There was a knock at the door. It was the cabin service steward with a laden trolley. The last thing we had done the night before was to order a full, cooked breakfast. Well, not quite the last thing. Elena and Amos were up, taking breakfast together. Crezia pulled on her robe and checked on Medea, who was still stable and sleeping deeply. "The signs are good," she told me on her return. "Tomorrow, perhaps the day after, she could be back with us." We ate together in her cabin, picking up our conversations from the night before. It was all familiar and relaxed, as if we had adjusted our clocks by 25 years. I realized how much I had missed her company and vitality. "What's the matter?" she asked. "You seem preoccupied." I thought about the yellow speeder. "Nothing," I said. During the long, slow climb up through the Utes to Locastra, I went through the data slates and material Amos had compiled since the attack on Spayton House. I paid particular attention to the name Kanyar the Sharp. Amos had compiled a list of planet cultures where the word Kanyar was still in parlance. 9,500 worlds, and I went down the list systematically, even though I knew Amos, with his greater knowledge of trivia, had already done so. Any one of them might hold the key. A kanya was a ceremonial oathing dagger on Benefax, Lues, and Kraton. It was the slang term for a gang lord on distant Mechanique. It was the common word for a pruning knife on 5 worlds in the Scarus sector alone. It was a Hive Argo adjective for sharp practice on Morimunda. On 3,000 worlds, it was simply the word for knife. A knife cutting me to the quick. Who was Kanya the Sharp? Why was he diligently seeking my destruction and the destruction of my entire operation? I turned to consider the slate listing the injuries he had dealt against me. The deaths he had, I'm sure, ordered. They were all still shocking to me. The sheer scope of his murderous efforts astounded me. So many targets, so many worlds, and all struck at the same sidereal moment. I found that I kept coming back to the notice of Inchabel's death. It was, simply, the odd one out. Every other victim or location target had been a specific part of my personal organization. But Nathan Inchabel was not. He had been, an inquisitor in his own right. During my campaign against the heretic Quixos, almost 50 years earlier, Inchabel, then holding the rank of interrogator, had been part of my team. He had joined my fold after the death of his master, Inquisitor Roban, during the atrocity on Thracian Primaris, and had continued to aid me devotedly until after the purge of Quixos' stronghold on Farnus Beta. After that, with my sponsorship, he became an inquisitor and began his own work. Since then, we had been in contact only a few times, and, apart from our old friendship, there was no connection between us. Why had he been marked out for destruction too? Coincidence was not a good enough answer. What connected us? Who connected us? The obvious name was Quixos, but that led nowhere. I had eliminated Quixos myself. I ran through the list of worlds again, trying to discern a link. One of the planets named on the list was Quenthus 8. The name snagged me like a protruding claw. Quenthus 8, a margin world. I had never been there, but I'd once been told about it. Running on instinct, I cross-checked Quenthus 8 with a vast list of worlds on which Tare or Tari was a registered surname. Amos had already cross-referenced the lists of worlds using Kanyar with worlds owning the surname Tare, and had come up with 700 possibles. Now I was able to add sense to one of them. There it was. Kanyar was the word for a war knife on Quenthus 8, and Tare was a clan name from that world. Nearly 350 years before, one of the most vile sociopaths in the Imperium had started his career on Quenthus 8. Marla Tare's reported claims to have been born on Gudrun had been discounted by Amos, who had checked the census and found no sign of the name. He hadn't gone back far enough. He hadn't gone back 3,500 years. I did, and found that Tari had been a peasant name on Gudrun until that time. The family tree ended right there. I knew who it was. I knew who my enemy was. Chapter 13. Locastre. Full stop. End of the line. We arrived at Locastre over an hour behind schedule. Unseasonal blizzards had swept up from the east into the Utes, and the express had been forced to reduce speed to a crawl. On steep gradients through the passes, there was a danger of backslip, and we could feel the frequent jerks as the car bogies hunted over the ice-caked rails. There was a 10-minute stop on a straight section on the west of Ute Major, as the train's engineer gangs got out and winched the locomotive's nose plough into place. The blizzard was around us then, and everything outside the windows was a colourless swirl. I went down to the end of the car and peered out through the van windows. Black blobs were moving in the white haze, some lit by fizzling flares of green and red. I felt several jolts and metallic clunks shiver through the deck beneath me. The intercar tannoy softly informed us that we would be on our way soon, reassured us that the weather was no hazard, and soothed us with the news that complimentary hot punch was now being served in the dining salon. Unnecessarily muffled in furs or expensive mountain wear, other passengers came to peer out of the mush-flecked ports, grumbling and what-ifing. I returned to the cabin I shared with Amos, locked the doors, and sat down with him. I ran through my theory.
Pontius Glor.
His old lips spat the name.
Pontius Glor.
It fits, doesn't it?
From what you tell me, Gregor. Though, of course, I know little of what passed between you and that monster on Kinchair.
We had first tackled the villainy of Pontius Glor and his poisonous brood right there on Gudrun back in 240, an age ago, as it seemed. At the time, Glor himself, a notorious heretic, had been dead for 2 centuries, his obscene activities curtailed by Inquisitor Angevin. But Glor's intellect and engrammed personality had been preserved in a sympathetic crystal by his noble family. We thwarted the attempts of House Glor to restore him to corporeal life, and afterwards I had the crystal placed for safekeeping with my old ally, Magos Geared Bure of the Adeptus Mechanicus. A century later, in 340, I had revisited Bure's remote fastness on the mining world Kinchair during the Quixos affair, in order to obtain arcane information concerning demon hosts from his prisoner. Without Pontius Glor's dark advice, I would never have been able to vanquish Quixos or his slaved demons, Profanity and Cherubeo. But I had been forced to deal with Glor. Make it worth his while. The lure I dangled was that in return for his help, I would commission Bure to manufacture a body for him to inhabit. And because I was an honorable man, I kept my word, believing that even if Glor was given mobility, he would never escape Geared Bure's clutches. It seemed I had been wrong about that. During those private interviews on Kinchair, Glor had confessed to me the event that had driven him, the accomplished scion of one of Gudrun's most respected noble houses, into the worship of the war. It had happened on Quenthus 8 in 019. Glor had been visiting the Quenthi amphitheatres, purchasing gladiators for his pit-fighting hobby. Even before his fall, he was a cruel man. He bought one brute, a warrior from a remote feral world. Moria, I seem to recall. Anxious to please his new master, the warrior had given Glor his torque. It was an ancestral relic from the feral world, and neither the warrior nor Glor realized it was tainted with the foulest chaos. Glor had put it on, and immediately had fallen into its clutches. That one simple act had sealed his fate, and transformed him into the idolatrous fiend who had plagued the Helican subsector for nearly 2 decades. I gave Amos the gist of this.
The matter seems to fit together. You believe, I take it, that Pontius Glor has escaped from his prison on Kinchair, built up his forces, and is now targeting you for revenge?
Revenge? No. Well, indirectly perhaps. He certainly would want to have his revenge on me, but the scale of his attack, the effort, the comprehensive scope, every element of my operation, and Inchabel too. Amos shrugged.
Inchabel was with us at Kinchair.
That's my point. Pontius is trying to destroy everyone who might know he exists. Most of the Imperium believes he is long dead. We pose a threat to him just by knowing about him. I could tell Amos had something on his mind that he didn't want to say. Amos?
Nothing, Gregor.
Old friend? He shook his head. Say it. Pontius Glor's existence is only a secret because I never informed the Orders that he was still sentient. Because I never delivered his engram sphere into the custody of the Order Herticus, as I should have. And he's only free now because I had a body built for him.
No.
He got to his feet and squinted out of the car window, trying to see something, anything, in the blizzard.
We've had this conversation before, or at least one like it. About Cherubeo.
He turned to look at me. He was so very old.
You are an inquisitor of the glorious Imperium of mankind. You are dedicated to the destruction of evil in any facet of its 3 classic forms. Zelos, Malleus, Herticus. You face unimaginable hazards. Yours is the most arduous task undertaken by any Imperial servant. You must use every weapon at your disposal to protect our culture, even the arsenal of the enemy. And you know full well that sometimes such uses have consequences. We may now regret your actions with Pontius Claw, but without those, Quixos would not have been brought down. We can play the if-only game all day. The simple truth is that victory comes at a price, and we are paying that price now. The true measure of your character is what you do about it.
I correct my mistakes. I bring down Pontius Claw.
I have no doubt of that.
Thank you, Amos. He sat down again.
This Tare woman, how does she fit in?
I showed him the census record. The Tares were a low-caste family on Gudrun during Law's organic lifetime. Then the line stops abruptly, but reappears on Quenthus. I think the Tares, or at least a Tare, were amongst Glaw's retinue, and he took them to Quenthus. I need you to look into that at Locastra.
Locastra? But we're only going to be stopping there for 45 minutes.
I gestured to the window. It'll probably be longer given the weather, but you'll have to move fast. I'm going to use the time to access the Aegis account. The handle of the lock-connecting door ratcheted back and forth.
Gregor,
it was Crezia.
what are you doing locked in there?
She called through the door. Just discussing things with Amos.
They're serving hot punch in the salon. I thought we might mingle.
In a minute, I called out in reply. There was a lurch, and the train started to move again. I looked at Amos. The things we've spoken about, they don't go any further. Not yet. Crezia doesn't need to know. Neither does Alina, come to that.
My lips are sealed, he said.
We came out of the blizzard and down a comfortable gradient into Locastra. It was nearly midday. The bad weather lurked like a grey wall behind us, veiling the Utes, but reports suggested it was moving into the valley. At Locastra, the porters announced a 90-minute stop. I told Alina to make sure the express didn't leave until Amos and I were safely back. Locastra occupies a cleft valley, gouged by glaciers. The old buildings are dark grey. Granite stands in for the traditional Gudrun oozelight used in the lowlands, and the altitude and climate is such that pressurized, heated tunnels of armor glass sheath the streets. I hired a servitor litter and had it scurry me through the warm, damp street tunnels, as ominous squalls of snow peppered the transparent roof above. Outside the office of the Astropathic Guild, I told it to wait and left my credit bar locked into its fare meter as good faith. It settled low on its spider-limbed chassis, venting steam from its hydraulics. There was a message from Nail waiting for me in the Aegis account. He had made good time and was already in New Give. Passage off-world had been arranged with a freighter called the Caucus. He was eager to see me. Nail's communique was in Glossia, and I phrased my reply the same way. Weather permitting, we would be in New Give in 2 days. On arrival, I would arrange a meeting with him. "Is that all, sir?" asked the adept attending me. I remembered Crezia's comments of a dinner about Nail being trustworthy. I added another line, suggesting that the situation reminded me of the tight spot we'd been in on Ichan years before, facing Beldame Sadia. "Send it, please," I said. Up at the station, the express sounded its horn. The express rumbled up into the central Athens, chased by the weather. Despite the fact that we were now scaling some of the steepest and longest gradients in the route, the locomotive was running at full power, trying to outpace the snows for as long as it could. The main range of the Athens, through which we now travelled, included the greatest mountains on Gudrun: Skarno, Dorpali, the Heldergay, Vespa, Mount Atina. Each one dwarfed the peaks like Mons Fulco that we had encountered earlier. They seemed as dark and cyclopean as tilted continents. They were also beautiful. Peerless tracks of blue-white ice, unblemished leagues of snow, sharp sunshine that almost twinkled like starlight in a vacuum. Until, before nightfall, it all vanished. Freezing fog and vapor descended like a stage curtain, sealing out the light and dropping visibility to a few dozen meters. Then snow began to flutter again, and our speed decreased. The weather had caught up with us. "Gregor," I had been watching the snowstorm, "come in here." Crezia beckoned me through the connecting door. Medea was awake. The cyber skulls hovered back to give me room as I sat down beside her car. She looked tired, drawn, faded almost, but her eyes were half open, and she managed a thin smile as she saw them. Everything's okay. You're in safe hands. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Gods try to speak, Crezia whispered. I saw curiosity in Medea's eyes as she focused on Crezia. This is Dr. Bershilde, a good friend. She saved your life. What?
How long been asleep?
The best part of a week. You were wounded in the back.
I am sore.
That will pass, said Crezia.
They get us?
No, they didn't get us, I said. And they're not going to get us either. Shrouded by the bitter blizzards and maintaining no more than 60 kilometers an hour, we journeyed on across the roof of the world. I ventured out into the public areas and even to the salon a few times, and found that diverting entertainments had been laid on. Buffet meals, music, card schools, a regicide tournament, screenings of popular hololithic extravaganzas. Uniformed transcontinental personnel were out in force, keeping everybody happy and volubly disseminating the notion that being caught in an Atenate ice storm was all part of the romance of the famous rail line, and not a potentially lethal misfortune. If the locomotive derailed, or the power plant malfunctioned, and the train became stranded in the midst of a blizzard that lasted more than a couple of days, we'd freeze to death, and they'd have to wait until spring to dig us out. Of course, in the 990 years of the Trans-Atenate Express's operation, that had never happened. The train had always got through. It was a remarkably secure form of transport, given the terrain it crossed. But there is a first time for anything, as people can be forgiven for thinking. Years of experience warned the train staff to start reassuring and distracting the passengers the moment weather closed in, or they'd have a panic on their hands. The idle rich can be such worriers. We came to a halt 4 times before dawn the next day. The first time was at about 10 in the evening. The tannoy informed us that we were waiting for wind speeds to ease before crossing the Scarno Gorge Bridge, and that there was no cause for concern. Less than 5 minutes later, we were on our way again. I was still awake at 1 when we gently coasted to a stop again. I felt uneasy, and after 15 minutes, tucked the auto pistol into my belt, strapped Barbarisata to my hip, and covered them both with Amos's long green overrobe. The hallway was dark, the lights dimmed to an auxiliary amber. Little green cue lights glowed on the staff-only monitor display that was set in the panelled wall at the end of the car. I heard someone coming up the spiral stairs from the car's lower deck and turned to see a steward who regarded me quizzically. "Is everything all right, sir?" he asked. That was my question. I was wondering why we'd stopped. "It's just routine, sir. We're just coming over the Scarno gradient, and the master engine man has ordered a check of the braking elements in case of excess icing." "I see. Just routine." "Everything's perfectly safe, sir," he said with well-rehearsed assurance. As if to prove him right, the lights flickered and we were moving again. He smiled. "There we are, sir." I went back to my cabin. I barely marked the 2 further stops we made that night, but I kept my weapons to hand. The second full day of travel passed without incident. The weather alternated between long, furious blizzards and quick, glorious episodes of sunlit calm. We stopped 5 more times before supper. 5 more routine hesitations. The tannoy whispered that though we were behind schedule, we were likely to make up time once we were clear of the mountains and crossing the southern plateau in the latter part of the following day. I was growing impatient. I found myself pacing the train a lot, end to end. I even took Crezia to the salon for lunch and stayed long enough to play a board or 2 of regicide with her. Medea was gaining strength. By the afternoon, she was sitting up and eating for herself. The cyber skulls disconnected all her drips except the vital monitor. We took turns to sit with her. I let Elena tell her the details of what had happened since the attack on Spayton House. Medea listened intently, increasingly dismayed. When it was my turn to spend an hour at her side, she said, "You came back for me." "Yes." "You might have been killed." "You would have been." "They killed Yakut," she said after a pause. "We were running across the paddocks and they cut him down." "I know. I felt it." "I couldn't help him." "I know." "I felt terrible after all he had done to show me my father. And
I couldn't save him.
It was probably quick. The Vesserine are ruthless killers.
I thought I'd let him call out after he had fallen. I was going to turn back for him, but they were everywhere.
It's all right. She took a beaker from the bedstand and sipped.
Elena says they killed everyone.
I'm afraid they might have.
I mean, not just here. The distaff, Nail, Inchabel.
I nodded. Someone was very thorough that night. But here's a thought to cheer you. Nail's alive, and so's Fishing. We're going to meet up with both of them. That made her smile.
How did Nail get away?
I don't know. He hasn't given me any details. It would seem he got wind of something and left Messina before the attack. I'm looking forward to finding out what he knows.
Like who's behind this, you mean?
I winked. That, my dear, I already know. Her eyes widened. I'll tell you when I've confirmed my suspicions. I don't want you worrying unnecessarily.
Now, that's just cruel,
she scolded.
I won't be able to think about anything else now.
Then see what you come up with, I suggested. Medea was privy to most of my operation, and I thought it might be interesting to see if she arrived at any conclusion herself. The jolt made me strike my head against the side panel of the bed, and woke me up in time to feel 2 more hard judders before the train came to a complete stop. It was nearly 3 in the morning and pitch black. I could hear the ice flakes pattering like small arms fire on the window of the cabin. Every halt we had made so far had been smooth and gentle. Not like this. Amos had woken too, and sat up as I turned on the sidelight and strapped on Barbarisata.
What is it?
He asked. Nothing, I hoped. The inter-cabin door opened, and Alina looked in.
Did you feel that?
She asked sleepily. Find your pistol, I told her. We woke Crezia and got all 3 of them into Medea's cabin. Crezia looked befuddled and worried. Elena was wide awake by then and checking the cell of her weapon. I pulled on Amos's overrobe to conceal my own armament. Stay here and be vigilant, I said, and then left the connecting suite via the door to my cabin. In the gloomy hall, I could hear movement in the other cabins. Low voices and the occasional pip of a summoning alarm as worried passengers tried to call the stewards. I went back down the car to the monitor display the moment I saw the 2 red lights shining amongst the green ones. I slid open the display's glass cover and fitted my signet ring to the optical reader. The potent inquisitorial authority codes loaded into my signet ring rapidly overcame Transcontinental Line's confidence software and gave me access to the Express's master system. The monitor's little screen woke up and flickered with user-friendly graphics and bars of data. I requested clarification of the red warning lights. Alert code 88.508. A systematic trigger of active brake units, cars 7 through 10, forcing main brake arrest. Alert code 521.6911. Irregular breach of door seal, door 34, car 8, lower. I hurried along the upper deck of the train, heading for the rear. Some cabin doors opened and anxious faces looked out. No need for concern, I called in my best transcontinental tone, backing it up with a gentle surge of will that slammed doors after me like a drum roll. At car 6, I had to go down to the lower deck because of the dining salon. Passing into car 7, I saw 3 train staffers hurrying down the companionway in the direction of car 8. The lower hallway of car 8 was bitterly cold, and a gale was blowing down it. I saw 6 or 7 rail employees pulling on foul weather gear and lighting flares as they jumped down out of the open wagon door into the night. Several more were grouped around the monitor display, and one, a steward, saw me approach. Please go back to your cabin, sir. Everything's fine. What seems to be the problem? Just hurry back, sir. What's your cabin number? I'll bring along complimentary liqueurs in a few minutes. The rear brakes have just thrown and door 34 is open, I said. He blinked. How did you? What's going on? Sir, I want to guarantee your comfort, so if you'd just like to... I didn't have time for a debate. What's going on, Inex? I asked, reading his name off his brass lapel badge and juicing my words with just a touch of will. A name always helped to enhance the mental coercion. He blinked. The brake systems in the rear 4 wagons have engaged, which triggered an overall braking incident. he said, quickly and obediently. Did someone pull the emergency rope? No, sir. We'd have a source for that. And anyway, the train's entire brake system would have fired simultaneously. We believe it's ice in the aft units. That would cause a partial brake lock? Yes, sir. What about the door? It opened just after we stopped. The chief steward thinks it was one of the engineers opening the door to get out and check the brakes without informing the system he was unlocking the door. It wasn't forced. It was opened from inside, with a key. The effects of my will were ebbing, and his jocular tone returned. We've got personnel out line-side now, sir, checking the brakes. Including this engineer who supposedly opened the door in his eagerness to find the fault. I'm sure, sir. Find out, I said, using the will more forcefully. He ran back to the monitor panel, and his colleagues stood back, puzzled, as he operated the device. Who has access to door keys? Who the hell are you? One of the others asked. A concerned member of the public, I said, blanketing them all with willpower. Who has keys? Only engineers of level 2 and higher, Class 1 stewards and the guards, said another, stammering in his desperation to tell me. How many people is that? 23. Are they all accounted for? I don't know, said Inex. Stand aside, I ordered, and used my ring on the monitor. The train had a staff and crew of 84. Each one had a subdermal tracker implant, so that the trainmaster could account for the location of his people at all times. The display showed a graphic map of the train, but the screen was so small I had to scroll along it, looking at the schematic bit by bit. Master personnel were shown in red, engineers in amber, stewards in green, and guards in blue. Ancillary staff like chefs, waiters, porters, and cleaners were pink. Red and amber dots clustered in the locomotive section, and blue and green ones were speckled throughout the wagons. The upper deck of Car 9, the crew quarters, were full of pink lights. I saw a cluster of green and blue cursors that represented the men grouped around me at the back of Car 8's lower deck, near door 34. A sub-menu listed the amber and blue lights that had left the train to inspect the running gear. There was one green light amongst the pink ones in Car 9. I called up more information. The green light belonged to Steward Class 1 Rebert Awins. He was in his quarters. The express had made an emergency stop, and all the staff apart from the ancillaries were moving to secure the train, except Awins. Awins is Class 1. He'd have keys. Yes, sir, said Inex. Why isn't he assisting? They all looked at each other. When did you see him last? He was on the morning shift today, said one of them. I saw him in the rec room at shift change having his lunch, added another. Since then? They shook their heads. He should have come on again at 9, said Inex. Shall I check on him? No, I guess so, because he's dead. But there was no point scaring him. I changed my mind. Do that, Inex. I reached over and took the intercom headset off the man nearest me. He didn't protest. He didn't even notice. Go to his room and tell me what you find. Vox channel. I studied the headset's small earpiece and adjusted the responder. 6. Yes, sir, said Inex. As he turned to go, I reached out and touched him briefly on the forehead. He shuddered. My psi imprint would stay with him for a good 30 minutes now, even once he was out of my vicinity. Inex ran off. I looked at the car door. It had been pulled too, but the unsecure light was still blinking. There were thawing cakes of dirty ice on the metal deck inside the door. How many people went out? I asked. One of them checked the display. 20, sir. How many have come back inside since you got here? None, they would say. They would be looking for me, for us. They knew we were on the train, and they'd got someone aboard at Fonette or La Castra, someone who had befriended Rebert Awins, killed him, and taken his pass keys. Someone with the technical expertise to trigger a partial brake lock, stop the train, and then use Awins' keys to open an exterior door and let his associates aboard. Someone who, by now, surely knew which cabins we were occupying. I ran back down the train towards Car 3, using the lower deck hallways. I slid Barbarisator from its Nedskin scabbard. It seemed so incongruous to be hurrying down a train's companionway, brandishing a sword. But the cabins around me were full of innocent Imperial citizens, and I didn't dare use my pistol. I also didn't dare use the intercom. I reached out psychically. Elena was an untouchable blank, so I called out to Amos, Cresia, and Medea. Be ready. Trouble coming. I passed several train staff in the hall as I made my way past, and they jumped back in alarm as they saw the plane. Forget, I willed at each one as I passed, and they just went on their way. I reached the front end of car 4 and prepared to go up. A transcontinental steward lay face down on the stairs. His neck snapped. Just then, the frantic voice of Inex wailed into my earpiece. "He's dead! Oh, God, Emperor, he's dead! Ribert's dead! Sound the alarm!" The distress klaxon started to warble, and recessed light plates in the wall began to blink orange. I saw a third red light had lit up on the car end monitor panel. I jammed my signet ring against the reader and cued information. Alert code 946, decimal 2452. Irregular breach of window seal. Window 146, car 3, upper. I clambered over the steward's corpse and made my way up the stairs. The upper hallway of car 3 was even colder than the chill of car 8. The end window on the port side, beside the intercarriage articulation, was wide open, and freezing air and snow was whirling in. The window had been cut out of its frame with a power blade or melter torch. The light was bad, gloomy, half-dimmed lamps aggravated by the fretful blink of the alarm lights. The klaxon still whooped. I realized there were 3 dark shapes halfway down the hall ahead of me, skulking low. They hadn't heard me arrive over the howl of the blizzard and the shrill of the alarms. I hugged the panelled wall. Barbarisata throbbed, hungry. Even passively, I could sense the 3 men were psi-shielded. They made big silhouettes, combat armor. I saw the ugly shadow of an assault weapon as the point man waved his partners forward towards the doors of our compartments. I edged closer. The point man, oozing professionalism as he visually checked his rear, saw me. And all hell broke loose. Chapter 14. Barbarisata versus the Janissaries. Ettrick, blade to blade. Lunchtime drinks in New Give. The 2 killers nearest me turned and opened fire with blunt, large-caliber autoguns. I suppose the sword in my hand was a damn giveaway, but they'd have killed me anyway, even if they had mistaken me for a wayward bystander. They were professional killers, Vesserine Janissaries. They had a job to do, a contract to fulfill, and anyone in their way was a target. The fact that they were using solid round weapons confirmed they were Vesserine, the ultimate military pragmatists. They'd tailed the train in a poorly insulated speeder and deployed through a blizzard. In those conditions, standard las weapons might have died, their cell power drained by the cold. But a well-lubricated autogun would fire below freezing. It had only to rely on its percussive hammer action. Vesserine Janissaries. I had faced them before without knowing what they were. Now I knew, and their formidable reputation almost gave me pause. Vesserines, 3 of them, plated in combat armor and firing heavyweight man-stopper ammunition. Frankly, I'd rather have squared off with angry Kazrakin. But Barbarisata was in my hand, alert and alive. I had been using my will openly for some time, and that had quickened its strength. I made a gun facile, the figure 8 stroke, and smashed the first 3 shots away, impact sparks sheeting from the energized sword blade. Then I struck an Uesar, an Ulsar, and a Urawaila Bay in rapid series, deflecting squashed rounds in the paneling around me. Wood splintered. I dived sideways as further shots punched into the hallway carpet and exploded on the interwagon doors. People were screaming in the cabins all around. I rolled and came up on my feet as the first Vesserine rounded the car-end corner and fired 6 times. His ejecting shell cases patterned off his torso in a fog of blue smoke, and his gun muzzle lit up like a blowtorch. Point blank. Except I was behind him. His gunfire shredded the wagon wall and ruptured the window frame. Barbarisata removed his head. The second one was charging and firing too. He let out a mask-muffled bellow as he saw his comrade collapse in pieces. I threw an Uragay sequence that diverted the white blurs of his bullets, then followed in with a Uin Tar Weiler that chopped the barrel off his weapon, a reverse Tarn stroke that severed his forearms, and the Ul Care, the death stroke. Hot red blood was already spurting from his arm stumps and steaming in the freezing air as Barbarisata plunged through his ceramite chest armor and burst his heart. The gunshot walls were painted with instantly frozen dribbles of bloody ice. A bullet creased the corner of my jaw with enough force to rip open the flesh of my chin and knock me to the carpet. I tried to rise, but the third Vesserine was right over me. I heard his weapon rack. He screamed. I felt a burning in the cold air. I looked up. The Vesserine was trying to shield himself, as if from a swarm of stinging insects. Crezia's cyber skulls were flitting around him, stabbing repeatedly with their surgical lasers. His yelps were cut off by the double crack of a las weapon. The Janissary collapsed like a dead weight at my feet. I looked down the hall and saw Elena Coy in the doorway of my room, holding her pistol in a defiant two-handed grip. "Elena," I yelled, "get the others out of the compartment. Get them out into the hall and move them this way." "But Medea," she began. "Do it!" I ran to the cut-out car window and hauled myself out into the vicious chill. I had to sheath Barbarisata, and it didn't like it. Outside, it was bone-achingly cold, and the blizzard pummeled me with hail hard as stones. There was precious little in the way of handholds, and the exterior of the car was iced up. I found something to cling to. Solid runnels of ice, I think. My fingers went numb. I hauled myself up onto the roof of Car 3, the vast snow-peppered blackness of the Atenate night above me. The blizzard ensured I couldn't see far. I could barely stand up. The convex aluminium roof of the wagon was iced smooth as a skating rink. A few steps along and my legs went out. I fell smack on my front, dazed and winded. Blood filled my mouth. I had bitten my tongue. Spitting blood and made angry by the pain, I dragged myself forward through the elemental deluge. I saw shapes ahead of me in the white-on-black maelstrom. 3 more armored figures on the edge of the roof. They had lowered a directional detonator onto the window of the cabin I had shared with Amos. As I watched, they triggered it and blasted the window inwards in a hail of glass and fire. The first Janissary began to rope down to swing in through the blown window. His comrades were hunched on the rooftop, anchoring his lines. I leapt up, and Barbarisata flew out, crackling in the wet air. The augmented Carthaean warblade came down, splitting the lines in two and cutting deeply into the wagon roof. The descending killer shrieked as he fell away down the side of the 2-story carriage. The other 2 jerked round like lightning, one going for his sidearm, the other leaping at me with clawing hands. A Tarnweiler met him and bisected his head like a ripe gummis fruit. The corpse rolled off the car top into the darkness. I stood ready, Barbarisata twitching in my hands. The remaining Vesserine backed away, aiming a large caliber auto pistol at me. The 2 of us could barely stand, such was the blizzard's wind shear. He fired once. An Ulsar flicked the round away. He fired again, his feet slipping, and I made a Uin Ulsar that spat the bullet off into the darkness. "My name is Gregor Eisenhorn. I am the man you have been paid to kill. Identify yourself." He hesitated. "My nomklet be Ettrick, badge of Clansire. Clan Zober." "Clansire Ettrick. I've heard so much about you." I had to raise my voice over the storm. "Vamiko Tal mentioned your name." "Tal? He be." "The one who let you aboard?" I finished for him. "I thought so. I had a feeling he'd been tailing me." "Be it he you just slew." "Is that so? Tough. Give yourself up." "I will not." "Uh-huh. Tell me this, then. How much is Pontius paying your clan for this work?" "Who be Pontius?" "Kanyar, then. Kanyar the Sharp." "Enough." He fired again, and then lunged at me, swinging a power sword up in his left hand. Barbarisata knocked the whizzing slug away, and then formed an Uesar to block the downswing of the glittering blade. There was a bark of clashing energies. I switched to a double-handed grip and ripped Barbarisata in a crosswise stroke as Ettrick tried to use his pistol again. The tip of the blade cut through the gun's body and left him with only a hand grip. But the Clansire's sword, a short yet robust falchion of antique design, darted in and sliced through the meat of my right shoulder. I howled. I snarled into a Letsuf that rebounded his thrust and swung reversing Ulsars that parried 2 more fast cuts and put me on the front foot. Ettrick was a big man with a considerable reach and alarming strength. That meant even his most nimble and extended strikes were delivered with punishing force. I did not recognize the blade technique he was using, although I was aware that the warriors of Vessor considered sword skill one of the 3 primary battle arts. devoting as much time to it during their training as to gun law and open hand. The very fact he was the owner of an heirloom power weapon identified him as an expert. My skills were a heterodox blend of methods that I had mastered over the years, but at the core of them was the Ulweiler Skrei, or the genius of sharpness, the ancient Carthaean sword mastery system. On top of the Trans-Atenate Express, any blade methods had to be semi-improvised. Neither of us were steady on our feet, our boots sliding on the iced metal, and the gale dragged at us hard. He kept attacking high, aiming for the throat, I imagine, and I was driven into a variety of Tarn Fei Sa parries with a tightly vertical blade that defend the head and ear. My own attacks were lower, von Uls and von Uin strokes that targeted the heart, belly, and sword arm. His defense was excellent, especially a sliding backdrag that fouled every von Bei I struck in an attempt to push his blade down laterally and open his guard. His attack strokes were inventively arrhythmic, preventing all but the most last-moment anticipations. He was hideously skillful. I wondered if that was why Pontius Glor had hired these Vesserines. He was such a connoisseur of martial skills and warrior breeds. He didn't just want killers. He wanted masters of the killing art. In Clansire Ettrick, he'd got his money's worth. I realized that the mercenary, with a combination of cross parries and driving thrust strokes, was pressing me back towards the gap between carriages 3 and 4. I was cornered with my back to the drop, my combat options restricted. I didn't dare risk a backwards jump without looking, and I couldn't take my eyes off his sword for a moment. I knew he would be building up to a sharp frontal attack that would either catch me with no room to dodge or topple me off the edge. Carthaean swordcraft teaches that when an imminent attack is unavoidable, the only practical response is to limit or force it. The technique, which has many forms, is called the Gej Kul Asaf, which means the bridled steed. It imagines the adversary is an unbroken mount who is going to charge no matter what you do, and that your blade is a long-range bridle that will control that charge on your terms. Ettrick was going to lunge, so I needed to reduce the lunging options. I went into an Ein Krusar, where the sword is raised, two-handed, with the hilt above shoulder height and the blade tipped down in a 35-degree angle from the horizontal. Sharp, lateral blade turns robbed him of any sideways or upper body opportunities. His only option was to come in low, parrying up, to get in underneath my guard. I was forcing him to target my lower body, an area his swordplay had shown he didn't favour. It also required him to extend in a low, ill-balanced way. Ettrick made the lunge, shoulder down and sword rising from a hip-height grip. My bridle entirely determined the height and direction of the thrust. Instead of backing or attempting to knock his rising blade aside with a diagonal stroke, I sidestepped, like a bull dancer evading a head-down aurochs in the carnival pits of Mancariel. Now he was running his sword into empty space. He tried to pull in, but he'd committed his weight behind it. His left foot kicked out on the roof ice, and his right one went skidding sideways. Ettrick grunted out a curse and did the only thing he could. He turned his lunge into a leap. He'd just made the roof of the next wagon, his chest and arms slamming into it, his legs wheeling over the top. His falchion had a pommel spike, and he slammed it down into the roof to anchor himself, his boots trying to get a grip on the weatherproof plastic sides of the intercarriage articulation. I had seconds to turn my temporary advantage into a permanent upper hand. But my hasty sidestep had left me with no more purchase on the iced roof than Ettrick. My legs suddenly flew out from under me, and I crashed down on my back. I rolled as fast as I could and fumbled for a handhold, but it cost me Barbarisata. The precious sword squealed as it tumbled over the edge of the roof. I was holding on, barely. Ettrick's pommel spike shrieked across the roof metal as he put his weight onto it and dug in. With a few scrabbling kicks, he hoisted himself up onto the roof of car 4 and looked back at me. He chuckled an ugly jeer as he saw me worse off than he was. Still chuckling, he gingerly took one step out onto the top of the intercarriage articulation, and then another, balancing as he crossed back to car 3 to finish me off. Another 2 steps, and he would be within stabbing range. I decided which of my handholds was most secure, and I let go with the other, fumbling round behind myself. Ettrick came off the articulation, took the last step, his sword raised to rip at me, and found himself looking down the barrel of my auto-pistol. It was contrary to all the noble rules of the Ulweiler Skrei to start a sword duel and finish it with a gun. The Carthaean masters would have been ashamed of me. But I wasn't feeling particularly noble by then. I fired just once. The shot hit him in the sternum and slammed him backwards. With a cheated look on his face, Ettrick disappeared off the far side of the roof. I was exhausted and drained from the extreme cold by the time I got back inside the car. The upper hallway was full of people. Stewards were ushering terrified and distraught passengers into other cars. Master personnel were gazing in perplexed dismay at the fight damage and the trio of Vesserine corpses. Elena was arguing heatedly with one of the master crewmen. Everyone looked round, and someone screamed as I slithered back in through the window. I must have looked a sight, caked in frost and frozen blood from the wounds to my arm and chin. Cresia and Amos pushed through the onlookers and reached my side.
"I'm all right. Let me look at that golden throne,"
gasped Cresia, twisting my head to study the gash in my chin.
"Don't fuss. You need... Now's not the time. Is Medea all right?"
"Yes," said Amos. "So you're all unscathed?"
"You're wounded enough for all of us,"
Cresia said. "I've had worse," I said.
"He has,"
agreed Amos.
"He's had worse."
Elena was still shouting at the trainmaster, who was shouting right back at her. He was a tall, distinguished man in an ornate brocaded version of the transcontinental uniform, topped with a navy-style cap. Clearly very old, his eyes, nose, and ears had been replaced with augmetic implants, primitive functional devices finished in boiler metal black that probably had been handcrafted for him by the locomotive's devoted engineers. Even his teeth, framed by a spectacular white tile beard, were cast iron. His name was Alivander Suko, and I later discovered that he had been master of the Trans-Atenate Express for 378 years. He looked like a bearded locomotive in human form. I pulled Alina back and faced him.
"I demand an explanation,"
Suko growled, his voice reverberating from a mechanical larynx.
"For this outrage. Nothing like this has ever happened aboard the Trans-Atenate. This vulgar violence and impropriety."
"Impropriety?" I echoed.
"Are you responsible for this?"
he asked. "I would not have chosen for this to occur, but yes."
"Detain him now,"
Suko yelled. A pair of burly train guards, who had withdrawn las pistols from the express's emergency locker the moment the alarms had started sounding, stepped forward. "There are 3 dead here, 3 more outside," I said softly, looking into the trainmaster's electric-shuttered eyes and pointedly ignoring the guards. All armored, all armed. Combat warriors. Do you really think it's a good idea to mess with the man who killed them? Silence fell on the corridor, colder and harsher than the ice storm still gusting in through the shattered window. All eyes were on us, including, to Suko's discomfort, the last of the gawping passengers still being herded out. "Shall we continue this in private?" I suggested. We went into one of the vacated cabins. I opened the hinged wooden cover of the suite's little cogitator, switched it to hololithic mode, and pressed my signet ring against the data reader. The little desk projected a hologram of the inquisitorial seal, overlaid by credential details, followed by a slowly turning 3-dimensional scan of my head. "I am Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn of the Ordos Helican." Suko and his guards were speechless. "Do you accept that, or would you like me to rotate slowly in front of you until you're convinced?" The trainmaster looked at me, so taken aback he barely knew what to say.
"I'm sorry, my lord," he began. "How can Transcontinental assist the work of the mighty Ordos?"
"Well, sir, you could get this train moving again for a start." But I'd had enough. "I have been traveling incognito, sir, but not any more. And if I'm going to reveal myself as an Inquisitor, I'm damn well going to behave like one. This train is now under my control." We remained halted long enough for the engineers to service the brakes and secure the exploded windows, and long enough for the train guards, under my direct supervision, to search the entire vehicle for any other passengers without tickets. Wrapped in crew-issue foul-weather gear, I went outside and retrieved Barbarisata, which complained fractiously about being left in the blizzard. I sheathed the whining blade and went to check on the 3 Janissaries, who lay sprawled and stiffening in the snow. The express resumed progress at 5, and there were no more interruptions. We thundered out of the night and into a more temperate dawn, where the land was thick with snow, but the ice storms had abated. Suko raced the locomotive right up to the safety margins to make up time. The express cut down through the southern extremities of the Atenate Range, descending through hill country and rocky glacial plains. If I'd been awake, I would have seen hard pasture and scree slowly blooming into forest and deciduous woodland, and then the first little hamlets of the vast southern plateau, sunlit in the morning air. But I was deep asleep, my wounds dressed, Barbarisata slumbering fitfully at my side, and Crezia watching over me. I woke after 5, with the express still making excellent time. We were due in at New Give at midnight. I'd given Suko strict instructions to send no word ahead of our plight. It was more likely that Pontius would try again at New Give. I studied the route map and thought about getting Suko to make an unscheduled stop at one of the satellite stations in the towns north of New Give. We could disembark and hire air transport, and the train could run on to the city. I thought my implacable and attentive enemy might anticipate this move, and I also considered that arriving in plain view at a major city terminal might be the safer plan. I lay on my cabin's cot, meditating as the lowland scenery of the plateau zipped by outside. Medea was up and around by then, hobbling painfully and using the wall my rune staff as a crutch. Only she would have the wit to dare such disrespect. She limped into my cabin and flopped down on the edge of my cot, nursing her sore back. Crezia was asleep in the opposite berth. "Never a dull moment, eh?" said Medea. "Never." She nodded over at Crezia. "She didn't leave your side, Gregor, all day." "I know." "She's more than just an old friend, isn't she?" "Yes, Medea." "Keeping your secrets." "I know. You never told me." "I never told anyone. Crezia Berchilde deserved the privacy." She glanced at me. "Gregor Eisenhorn deserved the privacy too, don't you think? You may be a great and terrible inquisitor and everything, but you're a human being too. You have a life outside this awful work." I thought about that. Sadly, I didn't agree. "But you're together again then, you and the good doctor?" "I have renewed a friendship I should never have allowed to lapse." "Yeah, right. Renewed." She made a surprisingly coarse and graphic gesture. I couldn't help but smile. "Was there something else, or did you just come in to demonstrate the vulgar extremes of your miming ability?" "Yeah, there was something else." "What do we do when we get there?" New Give was a cluster of monolithic hive pyramids covering the delta of the Sanas River. We could see its twinkling lights in the distance over an hour before we arrived. The Trans-Atenate Express rattled and hissed into the main terminal at 2 minutes to midnight. I got out ahead of the crowds and strode across the wide concourse under the arched glass roof to the Astropathic Guild's office near the freight cargo pens. I accessed the Aegis account and read the reply from Nail. He agreed that it was like the trouble on Ichan and cursed Sadia's name. He said the Caucus was ready to ship out and that he would be at a bar called Entipol's Lounge at noon the next day. The bar was in Hive 4, level 60. I looked at the communique sadly and then glanced at the waiting adept. 2-word reply. "Rosethorn attends. Send it." I walked into Entipol's Lounge the next day at a minute before noon. It was a cage of aluminium tubes and spray-painted flakboard panels, artfully wired up so that the ropes of lights pulsed in time to the pound music the place pumped through the caster system. The place wanted to seem tough and underhive and dangerous, but it was all for show. This was a lunchtime and after-work watering hole for mid-hive clerks and administratum graders, a place for assignations with winsome girls from the logisticator pool, the celebrations that accompanied promotions or retirements, or rowdy birthday drinks. I'd been into real twist bars and heard genuine pound. This place was just sham. Theatre. I was shrouded in Amos's overrobe, the hood pulled up, wearing a rebreather mask I'd borrowed from the Express. I wanted to look like some tech adept on his lunch break, or a wearite stealing off for a tryst with his girl. The place was largely empty. A bored-looking steward polished glasses behind the narrow sweep of the bar, and 2 uniformed waitresses chatted in the rear doorway, holding their glass trays like riot shields. Half a dozen men sat in the booths that radiated off the bar's central hub, and a hooded figure was sitting, drinking alone, with its back to the door. I sat at one of the hub tables. One of the waitresses approached. She smelled of Obscura, and her penciled eyebrows framed widely dilated eyes. "Choice?" "Tundery, clear grain, double, in a chill sleeve." "Dokie doke," she returned as she stalked away. The music continued to blast. She returned with a single shot glass on her suspenser tray. The glass was actually a cup of pressure-molded ice. She tongued it onto my table and caught the coin I flipped at her. "Keep the change," I murmured. "Big spender," she mocked and paced off, wiggling a backside that had no business being wiggled. I didn't touch the drink. Gradually the ice melted and the oily liquid began to seep out over the tabletop. The hooded figure got up and wandered over to me. "Rosethorn?" I looked up. "That's me." She dropped the hooded cloak away from her shoulders. She had sharp features and long, straight black hair. Her coal-edged eyes glinted like jade. Not Harlan Nail at all. Marla Taray. She sat down opposite me and knocked back my drink, licking the ice water off her long fingers. "You knew we'd get you sooner or later." "I guess so." "Who's we?" The other drinkers in the bar had got up and formed a circle around us, sitting at adjacent tables. Marla Taray clicked her fingers, and they all drew back coats or cloaks to reveal the handguns they carried. She clicked again, and the weapons disappeared. "So this is a trap?" "Of course." "The astrograms weren't from Nail."
"Evidently."
"You've broken Glossier?"
"How clever are we?"
I sat back. "How did you do that?"
"Wouldn't you like to know, Mr. Eisenhorn?"
I shrugged. "Seeing as you've got me cold, yes. These men are more of your damned Vesserine, aren't they? I'm dead in my seat. I can't see the harm."
"I imagine you've guessed already," she said.
She smiled. I could feel her powerful mind trying to delve into mine. "Yakud Vance."
"That's right, Mr. Eisenhorn. Your astropath proved to be very useful, with the right persuasion. And the Janissaries excel at persuasion. Vance sent the communiques, pretending to be Nail. He knew Glossier."
She probed at my mind again.
"You're using shielding techniques,"
she said, her face darkening. "Of course I am. You would be too if the situation was reversed. I have to say, though, I'm disappointed. I was hoping that Pontius might be here himself. This is a trap, after all. Eisenhorn's last stand. He might have been civil enough to come and watch me die."
"Pontius is busy elsewhere,"
she snapped, and then realized what she'd said. "Thank you for that confirmation," I said.
"You bastard," she snapped. "You're dead. What good will it do you? This is a trap."
"Yes, it is. A trap." She hesitated. The Janissaries had all risen, guns out, aiming at me. The bar staff were fleeing, terrified. Marla Taray slowly reached out and took the rebreather mask off my face.
"Ettrick,"
she stammered, her jade eyes wide. "Yes," I said, 3 kilometers away in a locked lodging-house room, sweating and straining as I channeled my will via the rune staff and animated the body of Clansire Ettrick. Taray leapt back from the table, knocking over her chair.
"Damnation!" she shrieked. "He's got us! He's got us! How the hell did he know?"
"You could talk like Nail and use Glossier thanks to Yakud, but Yakud didn't know what Nail knew. We fought Sadia on Lethe 11, not Echan," I had Ettrick say. Marla Taray drew a plasma pistol and shot Ettrick through the chest. The Vesserines all around opened fire with their autoguns and las carbines. As my puppet was torn apart, I let go of the warp vortex that had been spinning in my mind ever since I had summoned it. It surged out of Ettrick's collapsing body and expanded, annihilating the Janissaries, Antipol's lounge, and the entire level 60 deck of Hive 4 in a radius of 50 meters. Marla Taray was atomized. In the last milliseconds of her life, her mental shields collapsed in terror, and I got a precious snapshot into her powerful psycho mind. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know that I had just annihilated Pontius Glaw's daughter. Chapter 15. Sanctum, Catharsis, and Fishing. Tet Uinsar, Promedy. 15 days later, we were a long, long way from New Give, a long way from Gudrun itself. I had, for the time being, evaded the clutches of Kanyar the Sharp. The morning before my meeting, or my puppet's meeting, I should say, with Marla Taray in the mid-hive bar, Amos and I had arranged passage on a packet lighter called the Spirit of Wisdom, and by the evening we were leaving the planet. 5.5 days out from Gudrun, in the vicinity of Saito, we rendezvoused with the SN. My old friend Tobias Maxilla, eccentric master of the sprint trader SN,
had come in response to the glossier code word Sanctum without hesitation, breaking off from his merchant runs in the Helican spinwards and laying course for Gudrun. He had never been a formal part of my operation, but he was an ally of long standing, and had provided the services of his ship on many occasions. He always claimed to do this for financial reward. I regularly made sure the Ordos remunerated him handsomely, and to keep on the good side of the Imperial Inquisition. Privately, I believe his allegiance to me was the product of an adventurous streak. Getting involved in my business offered more diverting occupation than a trade voyage down the Helican worlds. There was no ship, and no ship's master, that I trusted more than Tobias Maxilla and the SN. With my life shattered, my back to the wall, and an enemy after my blood, he was the one I turned to for rescue and escape. One could also always rely on Maxilla to lift a company's spirits. In truth, the mood in my little group had been uncomfortable since New Give, and that was largely my own fault. As soon as I had realized that Nail was just another of Glaw's deceits, a ruse to lure me into a trap, I had set my trap in return. Certain sections of the Malus Codicium concern the creation and remote animation of thralls, human beings psionically controlled as puppets. I had never tried the technique, for it seemed ghoulish. The Codicium suggested the process worked best with a freshly killed cadaver. But on the other hand, it was simply an elaborate extension of my use of will, and it suited my purpose. I didn't go into detail about what I was going to do, but Medea, Elena, Cresia, and Amos knew something unorthodox was afoot, and they were all concerned when I had Etric's body covertly taken from the train to a lodging we had rented in Hive 4. Cresia mumbled something about body snatching, and Medea was dubious. Back aboard the Pulchritude, she'd shrugged off as a joke the idea that I was dabbling too far. She seemed to have accepted the whole business with Cherubale. Now she seemed less confident about esoteric psychotricks. Even Amos seemed reserved. He had not said a word about the Malus Codicium since he'd seen me remove it from the safe in my study. And he'd made it clear on several occasions that he trusted my judgment. But there had still been a feeling in the air. I kept them out of the room while I performed the rituals, and that may have been a mistake too. Except for Elena, who was spared the sensations, they all felt the unnerving, creeping backwash of the act. I had also never used a warp vortex before, but it seemed the only weapon I could equip my thrall with that would trap the trappers. In hindsight, I wonder if the Malus Codicium had planted the idea in my head. The vortex worked. It destroyed the enemies who had tried to snare me. I doubt I will use one again. The feedback left me unconscious, and I was ill and weak for 2 days afterwards. My friends had to break down the door of the room to get at me, and they must have been shaken by the sight that greeted them. The burnt circle on the floor, the psi-plasmic residue trickling off the walls, the symbols I had painted. I think they felt for the first time that I had attempted something I wasn't quite in control of. Perhaps they were right. None of them had wanted to talk about it. Amos had found the Malus Codicium on the floor beside me and slipped it into his pocket before the others could see it. Later, aboard the Spirit of Whiston, he'd handed it back to me privately.
"I don't want to touch it again," he said. "I don't think I want to see it again."
I was unhappy at his reaction. His life was devoted to the acquisition of knowledge. It was an actual clinical compulsion in his case. But there he was, rejecting a source of secret data, albeit dark, that could be found almost nowhere else in the galaxy. I thought he alone might appreciate its worth.
"It's the Malus Codicium, isn't it?"
Yes.
"They never found it. On Farnus Beta, after Quixos fell. The Ordos searched for it and never found it."
That's true.
"Because you took it for yourself and never told them."
Yes. It was my decision.
"I see. And that's how you learned to control demon hosts too, isn't it?"
Yes.
"I'm disappointed in you, Gregor."
Maxilla was, as ever, the perfect host, and the general spirit did pick up a little once we were in his company. He met us at the SN's 4-starboard air gate, dressed in a checkered cedral gown coat, a blue silk cravat pinned with a golden star pin, and a purple suede calotte with a silver tassel. His skin dye was gloss white with black hearts over his eyes, and a fine platinum chain ran between the diamond earring in his left lobe to the sapphire stud in his nose. Behind him, gold-plated servitors waited with salvers of refreshments. He greeted us all, flirting with Medea and making a particular fuss of Cresia and Elena, 2 females he had not met before.
"Where to?"
was his first question to me. Let me use your astropath and set course for the place we first met. I sent word in Glossier to Fishing, telling him to alter his route to avoid Gudrun and meet me at a new rendezvous point. Thorn wishes Hound at Hound's Cradle by Sext. Maxilla's cadaverous, nameless navigator performed his hypermathematical feats of divination and set the SN thundering into warp space as fast as its potent drive could carry it. As always, I was unable to rest easily while travelling in the hellish netherworld of the warp, so instead I retired with Maxilla to his stateroom. He was a terrible gossip, and always relished a few hours catching up whenever we were reunited. Surrounded as he was by a crew that was more servitor than human, he did so crave company. But I had been looking forward to a private talk. I had never confided in him particularly before, but now I felt he might be the only man in the Imperium who would give me a fair hearing. And, if not fair, then at least one free of harsh judgment. Maxilla was a rogue. He made no excuses about it. His entire life had been devoted to testing the ductile qualities of rules and regulations. I wanted, I suppose, to find out what he thought of me. His stateroom was a double-story cabin behind the SN's cathedral-like main bridge. A 10-seat banquet table of polished duralloy that I'd dined at many times before occupied a mezzanine area at the far end, under a domed section of roof that could peel back shielding at the wave of a control wand to become an observation blister. Curved stairways with tephra wood balustrades that Maxilla claimed to have been salvaged from a 20-mast sunjammer on Nautilia ran down from either end of the mezzanine onto the main deck area, a wide hall with a floor of inlaid marble. Works of art, paintings, statues, antiques, hololiths, were displayed all round the room between the chryselephantine wall pillars. Some were protected by softly glowing stasis fields. Others hung weightlessly in invisible repulsor beams. Elegant scroll-armed couches and chairs, some draped with throws of Sampanese lightcloth, were arranged on a large rectangle of exquisite Olitari rugwork in the centre of the room. The rug alone was worth a small fortune. The room was illuminated by 6 shimmering chandeliers from the glassworks of Vitria, each one suspended by a small antigrav plate so they floated below the dished ceiling. I sat down on a couch and accepted the balloon of amasec Maxilla handed to me. "You look like a man who wishes to unburden himself, Gregor," he said, taking a seat opposite. "Am I so transparent?" "No. I fear it is rather more a case that I am hopeful. It's been a boring few months. I crave excitement. And when the only man I know who makes a habit of getting involved in the most ridiculously perilous adventures anyone ever heard of calls to me for help, I perk up." He fitted a low stick into a long silver holder, lit it with a tiny flick of his digital ring weapon, and sat back, exhaling spiced smoke, rolling the amasec in his glass around with an experienced hand. I tried to begin, but I didn't really know where to start. He put his glass down and made a gesture with his control wand like a theatrical conjurer. The air became close and slightly muffled. "Speak freely," he told me. "I've activated the suite's privacy field." "Actually," I admitted, "my hesitation was more to do with not knowing what to say." "I deal in routes and journeys, Gregor. In my experience, the best place to start is always the beginning, I know." I told him, first in general terms, and then with increasing detail, about the events as they had unfolded. Jura, Thuring, the battles with Crua Volt and Cherubale. His dyed face became tragic, like a clown's, as I told him about Elizabeth. He had always had a soft spot for her. Though I felt I had taken his advice and started from the beginning, I realized more and more that I had not. I kept going back, filling in details. To explain Cherubale, I had to go back to Farnus Beta and the struggle against Quixos, and that in turn required mention of the mission to Kinchair. I told him about the assault on Spaten House and our desperate flight across Gudrun. I recounted the murders that had taken place across the subsector. He'd known Harlan Nail and Nathan Inchabel, not to mention several other members of my team. My account of Pontius Glaw's revenge was a litany of bad tidings. Once I had begun, I couldn't stop. I spared nothing. It felt liberating to confess everything at last and unburden myself. I told him about the Malus Codicium and how I might have compromised myself by keeping it. I told him about my dabbling with demon hosts and thralls and warp vortices. I owned up to the deal I had struck with Glaw on Kinchair and how that had empowered him and turned him into the threat that now pursued me. Everyone, Tobias, everyone in my operation, my family, if you will, everyone except you, Fishig, and the handful I brought aboard here with me, has died because of what I did on Kinshare. Something in the order of, well, I haven't made an exact count, 200 servants of the Imperium, 200 people who had devoted themselves to my cause in the firm belief that I was doing good work, are dead. I'm not even counting the likes of Paul Rassi, Duclane Haar, and that poor bastard Vervuk, who perished in what turns out to be the overture to this bloodbath. Or Magos Bure, who must have been killed by Glor for him to have escaped.
"Might I correct you, Gregor?" he asked.
By all means.
"You called it your cause. That they were devoted to your cause. But it isn't, is it?
What do you mean?
You still passionately believe that you are doing the Emperor's work?
Damn right I do.
Then they died in the service of the Emperor. They died for his cause. No Imperial citizen can ask for anything more."
I don't think you were listening, Maxilla. He got to his feet.
"No, I don't think you were, Inquisitor. Not even to yourself. I'm pressing this point because it's so basic you seem to have overlooked it."
He walked across the stateroom and stood looking up at a hololithic portrait of an Imperial warrior. It was very old. I didn't want to think where he might have got it from.
"Do you know who this is?"
No.
War Master Terfuik. Commanded the Imperial forces in the Pacificus War almost 50 centuries ago. Ancient history now. Most of us couldn't say what the damn war was about anymore. At the Battle of Karossa, Terfuik committed 4 million Imperial Guardsmen to the field. 4 million, Gregor. They don't do battles like that anymore, thank the throne. It was, of course, the age of high imperialism, the era of the notable war master, the cult of personality. Anyway, Terfuik got his victory. Not even his advisors thought he could win at Karossa, but he did. And of those 4 million men, only 90,000 left the field alive.
Maxilla turned and looked at me.
"Do you know what he said, Terfuik? Do you know what he said of that terrible cost?"
I shook my head.
"He said it was the greatest honor of his life to have served the Emperor so well."
I'm happy for him.
"You don't understand, Gregor. Terfuik was no butcher, no glory hound. By all accounts he was humane, and beloved by his men as fair and generous. But when the time came, he did not regret for a moment the cost of serving the Emperor and preserving the Imperium against all odds."
Maxilla sat down again.
"I think that's all you're guilty of. Making hard choices to serve the Emperor the best you can, to serve him where maybe others would not be strong enough and fail. Doing your duty and living with the consequences. I'm sure dear Terfuik had sleepless nights for years after Karossa, but he dealt with that pain. He didn't have any regrets."
Committing men to battle is not quite the same as...
"I beg to differ. Imperial society is your battleground. The people you have lost were your soldiers, and soldiers are only martial resources. They are there to be used. You used your own resources to win your battles. This book you speak of, this demon host, he sounds fascinating. I'd love to meet him."
You wouldn't, I assure you. And it's an it, not a he. Maxilla shrugged.
"I fancy you wanted to talk to me about this because you thought you might get a sympathetic ear. Me being an old rogue and everything."
There were times, I swear, I believed Maxilla could read my mind.
"Let me tell you something, Gregor. I love you like a brother, but we're nothing alike. I am a rogue, a gambler, a liar, a reprobate. My vices are many and unmentionable. I never bend the rules. I break them, snap them, shatter them, however and wherever I may. In that regard alone, I am a kindred spirit. You are bending the rules of the Imperium, of the Inquisition. You are undoubtedly what they call a radical. But that's where the similarity ends. I break the rules for my own gain, to get what I want, to amplify my wealth and status, to make things better for me. Me. Just me. But you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for the system you believe in and the God Emperor you worship, and by damn, that means your conscience can be clean. I was taken aback by the passion of his speech. I was also taken aback by the suggestion, one that no one had dared make before, that I had become a radical. When had that happened? My actions may have been radical, but did that make me a radical to the marrow? Sitting there, in that opulent room, I realized Maxilla had hit on the truth, a truth I had been denying. I had changed, without recognizing that change in myself. I would always be grateful to Tobias Maxilla for that bruising realization. I felt better for it. I suppose you can't turn to your superiors for help? No, I said, still reeling from the fresh viewpoint. Because you'd have to tell them things you don't want them to hear? Of course. To get any kind of official help, I'd have to make a full report, and that report would fall apart under the lightest scrutiny if it omitted the codicium, cherubale. By the throne, the list goes back. I even hid Pontius Glor from them. What could I say? Pontius Glor is exterminating my forces. Where did he come from, my Lord Grand Master? Well, to be honest, I've known of his existence for centuries, but I kept him hidden from you. And he's only up and around now because I decided to give him a body. He chuckled. I see your point. What will you tell Fishig? Dear Godwin is as straight up and down as any man I know. I'll deal with Fishig. So, what is your next move? You mentioned this daughter of his, the Psyker. You saw things when you killed her, didn't you? I had indeed. Marla Tare's entire mental shield had crumbled just before the vortex annihilated her. The picture I had obtained was far from complete, but it was plentiful. Marla Tare was much older than she looked or claimed. She was the bastard offspring of Pontius Glor and a serving girl from Gudrun that Glor had taken with him to Quenthus VIII. Marla was born in 020, corrupted from conception by the tainted Torque Pontius War. Several notorious heretics who have evaded the Inquisition in the last 300 years were actually her under different guises. Many cases could be closed now she is dead. Pontius won't be too pleased. I imagine Pontius Glor now wants me dead even more than before. But they were after the Malus Codicium, you see. I learned that from her undefended mind. Glor knew Quixos must have it, and, once Quixos was dead, realized it must be in my possession. He wants that book so much. Do you know why? I saw images of an arid world just before Marla Tare died. A dried-out husk where primeval cities lay buried under layers of ash. Glor's after something there, and he needs the Codicium to help him. What? I don't know. Where? I don't know that either. There was a name, a word in her mind. Ghoul. But I don't know what it means or what it refers to. Her mind was in collapse. Very little made sense. I'll consult my charts and my navigator. Who knows? He sat forward and looked at me. This book, this Malus Codicium. May I see it? Why? Because I appreciate unique and priceless objects. I took it from my jacket and passed it to him. He studied it with reverence, a smile on his face. Not much to look at, but beautiful for what it is. Thank you for the opportunity to hold it. He handed it back to me. I can't believe I'm going to say this, he added. Me, of all people. But I'd destroy it if I were you. I think you're right. I believe I will. I put down my empty glass and walked to the doors. Maxilla evaporated the privacy field. Thank you for your time and hospitality, Tobias. I think I'll turn in now. Sleep well. One last thing, I said, turning back in the doorway. You said you break the rules to get what you want, that you serve no one but yourself, and everything you do is for your own ends. I did. Then why do you help me so often? He smiled. Good night, Gregor. The SN put in at Hubris 4 days later. Hubris was an outlying world in the Helican subsector, and Fishig, Bequin, Maxilla, and I had all met there for the first time in 240. Indirectly, that's where we'd first stumbled across Pontius Glor, too. Everything was turning full circle in the strangest way. I had rerouted Fishig here as a convenient and out-of-the-way meeting place, but it seemed apt. He'd been a chastener in the local Arbites when he'd first crossed my path. It was his homeworld.
For 11 out of every 29 months, hubris orbits so far beyond its star that the population are forced to hibernate in massive cryogenic tombs to survive the blackness and the cold. Those winters of eternal night are called dormant, and I had experienced one on that last visit. But now we arrived at the start of thaw, the middle season between dormant and vital. The tombs had emptied, and the great cities were waking under a pale sun. The population was engaged in a frenzied jubilee of feasting and dancing and general excess that lasted 3 weeks and was supposed to celebrate the society's rebirth, but which probably had deep-rooted origins in the traditional methods of recovery from extended cryogenic suspension, such as forced physical activity and high-calorie intake. I offered to travel to the surface to meet him, partly because I thought Crezia, Alina, and Medea could do with the relaxation of a festival, and Maxilla had never been one to turn down a party. But Fischig answered he would as soon come up to the SN, and he arrived, piloting his own shuttle, a few hours later. I could tell he was tense from the moment he stepped aboard. He was polite and seemed pleased to see Medea, Amos, and Maxilla. But with me, he was reserved. I told him it was good to see him, and that I was relieved he had escaped Glor's purge.
Glor, eh?
He said. He had heard all about the fall of the distaff and our other holdings.
I had wondered who it was.
We need to talk, I said.
Yes,
he said.
But not here.
Maxilla lent us his stateroom, and I turned on the privacy field. There's nothing you couldn't say in front of the others, Godwin, I said.
No? Glor's killed everyone except us few. Because?
Because?
You should have destroyed that monster years ago, Eisenhorn. That, or handed him over to the Ordos. What the hell were you thinking?
Same as I'm thinking now. I did what was best.
Nail? Inchabel? Bure? Soskova? The whole damn distaff? That was best?
His tone was venomous. Yes, Fischig. And I never heard you contradict my decisions.
Like you'd have listened.
To you, yes. Not once did I hear you say we should turn Glor over to the Ordos.
'Cause you always make it sound so logical. Like you know best.
I shrugged. This is beneath you, Godwin. It sounds like sour grapes. Things didn't turn out the way I would have wished, and your making out is all my fault. I took tough decisions that I thought were right. If you'd ever objected, I'd have considered your opinion.
Too easy. Too damn easy. I was only ever your lackey, your minion. If I'd said we vaporize Glor, you'd have said yes, and then hidden him anyway.
Do you really think I'm that underhand? You, of all my counsel, I respect the most.
Yeah?
He tossed his gloves onto a couch and helped himself to a schooner of Maxilla's claw blood.
Who told Bure to build Glor a body without telling any of us? Who suddenly knows how to conjure demons like an expert? You cover your secrets with such an almighty righteous air. We all thank the stars and the Emperor himself you chose us to help you in your work. But you're a liar, a conspirator, and maybe worse.
And you're too much a Puritan idealist for your own good. And mine, I hissed. I dearly wanted your help, Godwin. You are one of the few men I really trust, and one of the few humans in space with a stalwart spirit to keep me on the level. I needed you now in my fight to destroy Glor. I can't believe you're turning against me like this. He stared down at the contents of his glass.
I always did warn you I would if you crossed the line.
I've crossed no line. But if you feel that way, go. Get off this ship and leave me to my work. You'll always have my gratitude for the service you put in. But I won't have this bitterness.
That's what you think?
Yes. He hesitated.
I gave my life to you, Gregor. I admired you. I always believed you were right.
I still am. I serve the Emperor, just like you. Get rid of your rancor and we can work together again.
Let me think about it.
2 days, and we're leaving orbit.
2 days, then.
Apparently, his ruminations only took him a day. I had just received, via the SN's Astropath Bank, a rather fascinating communique, and I went looking for Fischig. I found Crezia playing regicide with Maxilla in a mid-deck suite. He'd taken quite a shine to Dr. Berschildi. She got up as I entered the room and excitedly displayed the stunning fun silk gown she was wearing.
Tobias had his servitors make it for me. Isn't it gorgeous?
It is, I agreed.
The poor woman has virtually no wardrobe at all, Gregor. Just a few travel bags. It was the least I could do. You wait until you see the ep6 dress they're embroidering for her.
Have you seen Fishig? I asked. Crezier looked at Maxilla sharply, and the shipmaster suddenly became occupied with his study of the game board. What? I asked. Crezier took me by the arm and walked me over to the cabin windows.
He's gone, Gregor.
Gone?
Early this morning. He left in his shuttle. Dreadful man.
He was my friend, Crezier.
Not anymore, I think.
Did he say anything?
No, not to me. Or to Tobias, except a quick goodbye. He was up late last night, though, talking to Medea and Amos.
About what?
I don't know. I wasn't included. Tobias took Alina and me on a guided tour of his art collection. He has some extraordinary
They talked, and this morning he just left.
I like Medea, but I think she may be a little careless.
I'd never have told that Fishig man about the things you did in New Give. And she did.
I'm just saying she might have.
I had servitors summon Amos and Medea. They arrived in my stateroom at about the same moment. Both of them looked awkward. Well?
Well, what?
Snapped Medea. What the hell did you say to him? She looked away. Amos toyed with the hem of his cloak.
I simply tried to make him understand, Gregor. About what you were doing. What you had done. I thought if he knew it all, he might see it like I see it.
Really? It didn't cross your mind he was a puritanical son of a bitch on a hair trigger? Just like he's always been.
I felt honesty was the best policy,
Amos muttered. Medea said something under her breath. Oh, say it so we can all hear, I snarled.
Honesty is the best policy,
Medea said.
I was appreciating the irony.
How so?
The stuff you never told us. The honesty you withheld.
That's rich coming from you, Medea Betancourt. In point of fact, I believe I told you everything. Shared everything. Sworn on my secrets.
Yeah, well,
she looked away. Oh, Throne. You told him, didn't you? You told him about Cherubale and the Codicium and Glor and everything. She turned on me, tears in her anguished eyes.
I thought he would understand if everything was out in the open.
No wonder he left, I said, sitting down.
Medea was only doing the same as me,
Amos said.
We were defending you to him, trying to make him understand and see things the way we saw them. We thought...
What?
We thought he might change his mind and trust you again if he knew it all.
I thought you both had more sense, I said as I strode past them and out of the room. There were several craft cradled in the SN's hangar. 2 ferry pods, a bulk pinnace, 3 standard shuttles, and a number of small flyers. I was busy directing the deck servitors to make a 2-man speeder flight ready when Medea came in, red-eyed and dressed for the surface in a fleece jacket.
I'll fly you down,
she said. Don't bother. You've done enough.
It's my job, Gregor. I'm your pilot.
Forget about it. I clambered into the tight cockpit of the bright red speeder, pulled the canopy shut, and fired up the single inline thruster. The launch chute opened, and I shot away from the SN at full throttle. I tracked his flight path to Catharsis, the capital city of Hubris. Festival flares and fireworks were spitting up above the slanted roofs of the vast inland metropolis. The Jubilee was in full swing. Once I had parked the sprightly little flyer at Catharsis Downport, I found myself weaving through a dense river of jumping, whooping people that clogged the winding streets. All of them showed the grey pallor of recent cold sleep. All of them were drunk. Bottles were pressed into my hands, and young women and men alike planted kisses on my face. I was jostled and shoved and scattered with petals and confetti. The smell of the cryogenic chemicals sweating out of them permeated the entire town. It took all afternoon to find him. He was alone in an upstairs suite in a crumbling but characterful hotel overlooking the processional tombs. "Get out," he said as I opened the door. "Godwin, get the hell out," he yelled, smashing a shot glass against the far wall. He'd been drinking hard, which was unlike him, although everyone else on Hubris except me must have been in the same state. Fireworks coughed and whizzed in the square under his windows. Fishig glowered at me for a long time, and then disappeared into the suite's bathroom. He emerged with 2 more shot glasses and a dish of ice. I stood in the doorway and watched as he slowly and carefully prepared 2 drinks. Anise poured over smashed ice. He placed one in front of himself and slid the other one towards the chair opposite. To me, that was an act of diplomacy. I sat down facing him and lifted the glass. "To all we've been together," I said. We knocked back the shots. I slid the glass back across the tabletop towards him, and he made 2 more. He passed the second one back to me and caught my eyes for the first time. I stared into his face, saw the eye-fogging scar that had already marked him by the time we met, saw the faint mauve scar tissue where the side of his face had been rebuilt after our clash with a Saruthi on the warped world orbiting KCX 1288.
"I never meant to run out on you," he said.
"I didn't ever suppose so. When did Godwin Fishig last run out on a fight?" He laughed bitterly. We sank the second drink, and he fixed a third. "Whatever Medea told you, whatever Amos told you, it's true, but it's not what you think."
"Yeah?
I'm no heretic, Godwin.
No?
I think I might have become what you'd call a radical, but I'm no heretic."
Isn't that what a heretic would say?"
"Yes, I guess so. If you'd let me into your mind, you'd see."
"No, thanks."
He shuddered, shoving his chair back with a squeak. "Okay." I sipped my glass. "It won't be the same without you."
"I know. You and me. Bastards. The Eye of Terror itself was shy of us."
"Yes, it was."
"We could do it again,"
he said. "We could?"
"We could work side by side like old times and hunt out the darkness."
"Yes, we could. I'd like that."
"That's why I'm sorry I ran out like that. I should have stayed."
I nodded. "Yes."
"I owe you that much. I should have tried harder. You're not gone. Not all the way. You're just slipping.
"Slipping?"
Into the pit. The radical pit. The pit no one comes back from. But I can pull you out."
"Pull me out?"
"Yes. It's not too late."
"Too late for what, Godwin?"
"Salvation,"
he said. The crowds outside were screaming and clapping. Barrages of fireworks were being launched into the early evening air, scattering new stars in their wake like fireflies. "What does salvation mean?" I asked.
"It's why I'm here. Why the Emperor put me at your side. To keep you centered. It's destiny."
"Is it? And what does destiny entail?"
"Renounce it all. All of it. Give over the Malus Codicium to me, the demon host, your rune staff. Let me take you back to the Ordo's headquarters on Thracian. You can do penance there. I'll plead for you, plead for leniency. They wouldn't be too hard on you. You'd be active again before too long."
"You actually believe that you could take me back to the Ordos, tell them what I've done, and they'd let me practice again?"
"They'd understand."
"Fishig, you don't understand." He looked at me, disappointed.
"You won't, then?"
"I think this is where I say goodbye. I admire your efforts, but I can't be saved, Godwin."
"You can."
"No." I shook my head. "You know why? I don't need saving."
"Then this is where I say goodbye, too,"
he said, pouring another drink. "Remember what we did," I said.
"Yes."
I shut the door behind me and left. It took me 3 hours to get back to the landing field through the solid mob of revelers. I powered the quick-heeled red speeder back up to the SN. They were all waiting for me in the hangar as I docked. Maxilla, Crezia, Elena, Amos, Medea. I tugged the rumpled copy of the astropathic communique I had received earlier out of my pocket and tossed it at Maxilla. "We're breaking orbit. New destination. Promedy." "What about Fishig?" asked Elena. "He isn't coming." There is a move in Carthaean blade work called the Tet Uin Sa. The phrase literally describes a position of the feet, but the philosophy is deeper. It means the moment in a duel when you gain the advantage and begin to win home. It is the turning point, the little fulcrum on which a life or death fight turns. The moment your fortunes change and you realize victory can be yours if you rally hard enough. I felt that the astropathic communique from Promedy was the equivalent of the Tet Uin Sa. It had been sent to me uncoded by a trusted friend I hadn't seen in a long time. It read simply, "Kanyar must be stopped."
Nothing on the local comms.
It took the SN 10 weeks to reach Promedy, a jungle world on the trailing hem of the Scarus sector, specifically the Antimar subsector. I went planetside alone, using the little red speeder in case it turned out to be a trap. They were waiting for me on a tropical hillside, below a break of pink-lobed puns trees. The evening was warm and fragrant. Insects fidgeted in the gathering dark. The air was humid. I got out of the steaming speeder. My old pupil, Gideon Ravenel, sustained by his force chair, rolled forward across the mossy ground to greet me. To his left, he was flanked by Kara Swoll. To his right, Harlan Nail. Chapter 16. Surviving Messina. Gideon's Omen. Nothing lasts forever. Harlan gave me a great bear hug, and Kara timidly kissed my cheek on tiptoe. I gazed at them both, hardly believing it. "You have a habit of coming back from the dead," I said to Harlan. "I'm just glad it's real this time." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I'll explain later. I refuse to explain anything more until you tell me how this is possible." "Why don't we go inside?" Ravenel suggested. He led us back up the path through the puns trees and across glades where the light was stained gold by the fleshy orange leaves that formed the canopy. Brilliantly feathered lizards flitted from branch to branch, and diaphanous insects the size of a man's open palm fluttered like seed cases in the humid breeze. Ravenel's force chair hissed over the ground a few centimeters in the air, surrounded and suspended by a spherical field generated by the slowly revolving and tilting anti-gravity hoop that encircled it. Beyond the wooded slope, the ground was flooded. A vast lake of yellow liquid stretched out under the jungle canopy that sprouted up from the water in lurid clumps. Fronds, rushes, and fibrously rooted trees formed hammock islets in the lake, along with batteries of puffy mauve or orange zootes, with giant leaves and tangles of saprophytic vines. Anti-grav walkboards bridged out across the resinous water, linking the dry land to Ravenel's camp by way of several of the hammocks.